So hi everyone, and welcome to this how-to class. I'm Patrick Palm, founder and CEO, and I'm just going to give a very short intro to why I think this how-to class is so important. And then John will guide you through how to practically work with programs using Favro. Now, the reason why I think this is so important is that in most organizations that have team of teams, so there's a bit of size. There's typically some kind of framework for how to work in an agile way. There are also formal frameworks. The Scale Agile framework, SAFe, probably being the most famous, but there's many out there. But what we see, with organizations is that very often, after you have implemented one of these frameworks, a couple of months later, people, leave the company, join the company. There's other changes, and in practice, these, the actual framework that you use will basically change all the time. So it was constantly change, and and that's not a bad thing. If both the way you work with processes, but also your tooling, if that's if that can adapt, to how you evolve as an organization, that's a good thing that you should embrace. And this is one of the things that we have designed, Favro for. So Favro doesn't dictate process. It really, bends to the way that you're working. Some companies also don't have any frameworks, but you still need to work on different levels in the organization. You have a kind of like team level. You will have more of a management level, and for these reasons, having a kind of a program way of thinking and setting things up would also make a lot of sense. And with Favro, everything is designed around enabling a more flat organization. More autonomous teams that can align towards company goals or objectives, also in an autonomous way. This is definitely where we see the most the most successful organization and what they're already good at, or what they're trying to become better at. We don't believe that higher degree of centralization, command and control is the future. We believe in more flat organizations with, as I said, highly autonomous teams that can align themselves, towards the company objectives. So with that being said, on why we and I believe this is so important, I would like to hand over to John, who's VP at Favro for our advisory around Agile and the product itself. So with that said, let's get into how to do this in practice.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Thanks for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. So I am going to share my screen and jump right in. For those of you not familiar with Favro, what we're looking at here is a collection. And a collection is an aggregation of boards that could be represented, a program board, which I'm going to be focusing on today, a program Kanban, individual Scrum team Kanbans, as you see here, various backlogs, maybe some visual roadmaps on a timeline. It's an aggregation of boards, maybe backlogs, again, roadmaps, everything that you need at the program level or the team level to do your job. So if I open up, for example, we're looking at this Agile release train. So an ART, so essentially a safe scaled Agile framework terminology for a program. If I open up this backlog, this product backlog that is shared across multiple teams. So you have, as Patrick said, multiple teams. You've moved beyond a single team. You have multiple teams all working out of the same backlog. Maybe in this case, 3 or maybe 4 different teams all working out of the same product backlog. So they have to be aligned on what are the most important things we're working on in this upcoming maybe program increment. If you're using SAFe, which is essentially 5 iterations. Or it could just be, what are we looking at, into the future for the next 2 or 3 sprints, doing some forward-looking planning. So if I open up to help with that, if I open up this program board over here on the right, you can see that we have this broken down first by iteration. So a typical program increment has 5 iterations. So maybe you work in a different way. You could just take some of these out. You could simply add another column if you wanted to add another iteration. And again, we have those 3 teams that make up this particular program or Agile release train, right? So we've created a swim lane for each one of those teams. And so now per team, per iteration, we're able to do some look ahead planning. Maybe we're doing PI planning again, if you're using Scaled Agile Framework. And this is a common technique to use to make sure that you don't have dependencies across teams. Now, you've probably seen physical boards that do this with all of the red strings connecting all the dependencies, right? And the whole goal is to resolve those dependencies before the program increment or the first iteration even starts. Now, if you're doing proper Agile, then hopefully you're resolving those dependencies before they even make it to the program board, right? Through proper prioritization, whether you're using, weighted shortest job first, or some sort of just, Moscow method, whatever the case may be. So making sure you prioritize around dependencies and also organize around dependencies. So you want each team, as Patrick said, to be as autonomous as possible, meaning that they don't have dependencies on other teams, right? So that's not, of course, always feasible. And that's why a program board is a good technique once you start doing your longer term planning across those teams of teams to see where those dependencies might exist. So for example, if I take something like change lane, and I want this to be worked on by team 1, this cross-functional team 1, right? And iteration 4, I can simply drag and drop it from the shared product backlog over to that team's swim lane and to that particular iteration. And you can see, thanks to relations, right, in Favro, that we're clearly able to see just by dragging and dropping into each one of those particular iteration buckets that reflected back here in the backlog too. So you can track this essentially in both places. Now I'm going to close the backlog and we're going to focus on this program board for this individual PI program increment. And you can see again, right, we have already identified a couple of dependencies. All right, so anytime you're doing one of these, it's always good to have some sort of direction, right? To see, okay, we have a dependency, but maybe it's okay because that thing that's causing the impediment is actually, right, happening before the thing that's being blocked. So in Favro, those are represented with these lines, these virtual lines, essentially representing this string. And you can also set a direction. You can click this, you can change the direction, right, back and forth based on, is this a before or after dependency, or predecessor or successor type dependency? And here in this particular case, when we can start to clear these up, right, we want to make sure there are no dependencies. So we essentially want to use this board to remove all these lines after we've identified those dependencies. Anything that's pointing forward like this is okay. This basically means that, selection of mapping software has to happen, or at least has to finish before GPS integration can finish. So maybe more of like an Agile end-to-end type dependency. So this one looks good. This one also has a forward pointing line, right? We need to have the radar components in place before we can work on surround cameras in this, fictional autonomous vehicle system. So both of these impediments can be removed. But before I do that, I also want to point out that you can see these on a dependencies tab when you open up each and every card on a Favro board. So I can see that this is an after dependency. This has essentially been resolved based on where these things are occurring out into the future. So by the time we get to this should be done. Let's resolve this impediment and we'll basically just remove it, right? We want to remove it from the board. This one also looks good. We'll remove this one too. Now we have a problem here where this dependency, right? So the thing that has to happen before we can detect fixed obstacles, right? We have to have those surround cameras in place. So here we have a problem because this is actually scheduled, right, planned to happen after this. So in this particular case, maybe all we need to do, right, is juggle this around and say, okay, well, maybe this is high priority when we did want to do it sooner rather than later. But based on the dependency across this other team, we're going to have to do this later. So we'll move that to iteration 4, keep this one in iteration 3. We now have that kind of forward-looking dependency again, where this should happen now before this even starts, right? And now we can probably remove this dependency as well. So that's how that works. Now, if I was creating a new dependency, right? Say we identified a new dependency just by looking at our plan on this program board while we're planning this program increment. And we see, okay, detect moving obstacles, right? We actually have to have this camera integration with the vehicle prototype in place before this can finish. So an end-to-end dependency between these two things. So I'm going to call that out simply by clicking here, right? Selecting add dependency, or I could also mouse over this and D is the hotkey to do that. Another way, so I'd select D, say before dependency, map through to here, right? So this is pointing backwards, bad. And I could also do this because you can switch the boards to different views. I could also do this in a timeline view, where maybe I can see this even more clearly out on a timeline that, okay, detect objects, right? Add dependency, before dependency, this thing that is currently planned out into the future. And if I switch that back to the Kanban view, you can also, on the program board, you can also see that dependency here in this view, which is nice, right? So many different ways to create these dependencies. You can also create them directly from the dependency tab here on the cards themselves. So in this particular case, right, we've identified this new dependency. We're going to have to do some rejiggering here to fix this. So maybe we're going to have to start this camera integration here in iteration 3. And maybe we can keep this in iteration 4, or maybe even move it out further into the future into iteration 5 to make sure there's enough time to have this 100%, at least finish before this can finish, okay? And here we've resolved this dependency. Again, it's pointing forward, so we're good. So we'll remove this one. And we're slowly but surely identifying and clearing dependencies off this program board, so you can see how this works. Now, what if we have external dependencies? What if we're working with a supplier, right? In this case, we're working on a product that's probably a mix of hardware and software. So what if we're dependent on an external supplier for maybe some of the hardware components? So I've called that out here on this follow straight path card, where that external dependency is represented by this stub pointing back to a card on a supplier portal. So Favro is also very good with working with externals through either external member accounts or external guest accounts. And if I navigate to this dependency, I can just click this and say, go to card. It's going to take me to that supplier portal, and I can see essentially their plan, right? So maybe this is what they use to plan their deliveries of these hardware components that we're dependent on as software teams internally. So here we can see this delivery of satellite solution, right? We have that dependency that this impediment basically that we're causing with the internal development teams. So we can see that dependency in both ways. We can see it here, right? We can actually turn on dependencies here and see them. And we can see it also, of course, back here on that program board. Now, maybe this is just a call out to them that they have to maybe accelerate the delivery schedule of this particular piece of hardware, whatever the case may be. But what you can do, even across teams, even working with externals, is to resolve those dependencies that pop up that maybe you can't resolve in your PI planning because it is working with an external vendor, right? Is you can at least have that conversation around the dependency directly on the card itself. So maybe that vendor is telling you, as you can see here, that there's a delay on this particular hardware component. And then you can write back, hopefully trying to resolve it. Like this. So each and every dependency on the card is going to have its own conversation thread to resolve that dependency ad hoc. As again, of course, much better than Gantt style dependencies where you have this spaghetti of hard dependencies. Here, people in interactions over processes and tools have the conversation, right? Even across with your external vendors to resolve those dependencies on the cards themselves, like you see here. Okay, so what if we have in the course of so we've started this program increment where we're making progress towards our deliverables. Maybe we're in iteration 3 and we're working on this particular backlog item here, autonomous vehicle systems dashboard UI UX, right? So we're basically creating that screen, whatever you're going to use as an interface in your vehicle to interact with the system type of thing. So maybe this is such an important feature that marketing has determined that they want to create some marketing materials around this particular feature and its release, right? So in that case, we have kind of something we couldn't plan for. Maybe that team, even though they maybe should have been, which we'll get to in a second, involved in this teams of teams planning, especially if you're a SaaS type of organization. But here we've identified an ad hoc dependency after the planning was done. So I'm going to switch now to another login, right? So I'm logged in now as somebody on that marketing team responsible for creating a launch page or a landing page, some sort of marketing materials for that particular feature. So I have a card on my board, AVS on my marketing team's board, AVS dashboard launch page. So I'm going to call out that dependency. I can come in here to the dependency, say I have a before dependency, where I actually need at least some UI mockups of that particular dashboard before I can create this landing page, right? So I can just search for that dependent card here, or I could just navigate to it across collections, which I'll show you in a second, and say it's actually the one that exists because the cards can exist in multiple places on this particular program board. And I've created that dependency across collections now, across teams of teams. And you can see that here. Now back here, when I am again logged in as maybe the program manager or whatever the case may be, and I'm looking at this, I can see that dependency has been called out. We have a problem here. And if I'm back as the marketing person, I can navigate here and again have that conversation around that particular dependency. Something like this. So I can get the screenshots or teaser videos, whatever I need to create that landing page. And then the person responsible for this, maybe the Scrum Master, can reply to this and have that conversation across those different teams, from development to marketing in this case. Maybe something like this. So an excellent way, again, to ad hoc remove and resolve these dependencies, even not working within product development proper. Now, maybe a better way to do this, right? And I'm just going to delete this dependency for the time being. Maybe a better way to do this, especially again, if you're a SaaS organization, that has to be aligned, not even just across multiple development teams, but with also other functions within the organization, marketing in this case, right? So we have to be aligned across not only those development teams, but also with our suppliers, also with marketing, maybe with compliance, right? Certainly with DevOps, LiveOps, all of those things need to be aligned as you're moving through your cadences. So in that case, it might make sense, and this is where we talk about your frameworks, right, bending rather than breaking, to simply just add another lane here for marketing and include them in that forward-looking planning. So we just add a marketing swim lane, and you have the ability to bring in other teams' boards into other collections. So in this case, for this example, I brought in that marketing team's Kanban. It's the same one that they see in their bespoke collection. And you could simply maybe drag this up, this card here representing this deliverable that they're responsible for, to the board like this. And then as part of that, identifying those dependencies, we can say, okay, this particular thing here, we have that dependency. We need those mockups before we can actually finish this. So we'll add that dependency, and we're in line on the board itself now. So it makes it much easier, much more clear to identify those dependencies across other functions in the organization before they even happen. So we could do some rejiggering here. Maybe this has to start a bit later, or this could start a bit earlier to resolve that particular dependency. Now, even a better way, and this is very unique to Favro, and this is the last thing that I want to show you. Maybe even a better way, and I'm going to delete this swim lane. Would be to simply share that card, right, representing this particular user story, this particular backlog item with marketing when it's ready for them to do what they need to do. So flow-based development, right? So when it gets to a stage when it's ready for them to create that landing page, then it's time to get them involved, right? So they can do what they need to do instead of doing all this look ahead planning, which might change anyway. So in that case, all we'd have to do is take this card, right? Because you can have cards in multiple places in Favro simultaneously. We could take this card and drag it down. I'm going to minimize a couple of these swim lanes. And simply, we could do this ad hoc. We could do this even through automations. Drag this down to that marketing team's board manually, as I'm doing now. And now this same card exists on both the development team's boards and their current Kanban board or sprint board or iteration board when it gets to this iteration, and also the marketing team's flow. And again, this could be done with an automation, so this doesn't get added to their board until this is already in progress. Okay, so here now, we're, instead of creating all the spaghetti of dependencies, here now we're actually collaborating on the same card, because it takes multiple teams, multiple functions to actually deliver this ultimately to the customer, including marketing, what they need to do, letting customers know about this particular feature functionality before it's even released, potentially. So in this case, right, we're all working off the same card. If I open up that backlog again, and I look at that card in the backlog, again, using relations, I'm going to be able to now track both the progress, what iterations things are happening in across multiple teams. I can see that the product development team, this is tagged to iteration 3. Maybe from a status standpoint, it's currently selected from a development team status. And we can see that this is such an important thing that marketing needs to get involved too. And we can see that they currently have it at grooming. And if I open up that card, you're also able to see, you can break down that card to multiple task lists, right? Again, bringing people together, even across different functions in the organization, to ultimately do what needs to be done to get this released to the customer. You can have a list of development tasks and a separate list of maybe marketing tasks. And of course, your acceptance criteria, your definition of done, all of that can live on a single card instead of having to create multiple cards in the first place. So that's a thing that's, again, very unique to Favro, because you have that ability to have the same card going through multiple team flows simultaneously. For example, once this moves from a marketing team standpoint from grooming to copywriting, that's instantly reflected here in the backlog. Okay, so there you have it. That is setting up a program, essentially teams of teams, even teams across multiple functions in the organization, for a SaaS organization in Favro. Thanks very much.